Mr. Speaker, here is a question. Is Canada an essential country at this time in the life of our planet? Most of us here would agree that it is. But if we assert this, we are called to explain why. And we are called to consider the specifics of what we must do as a consequence. International relationships that had seemed immutable for 70 years are being called into question. From Europe to Asia to our own North American home, long-standing paths that have formed the bedrock of our security and prosperity for generations are being tested. And new shared human imperatives, the fight against climate change first among them, call for renewed, uncommon resolve. Turning aside from our responsibilities is not an option. Instead, we must think carefully and deeply about what is happening and find a way forward. By definition, the path we choose must be one that serves the interests of all Canadians and upholds our broadly held national values, that preserves and nurtures Canadian prosperity and security, and that contributes to our collective goal of a better, safer, more just, more prosperous, and sustainable world. One we can pass on to our children and grandchildren with a sense of having done the right thing in our time. This is no small order, Mr. Speaker. It is what I would like to spend a few minutes talking about today. Même avant la fin de la Deuxième Guerre mondiale, en commençant avec la conférence internationale de Bretton Woods en 1948, le Canada a joué un rôle actif dans la mise en place d'un ordre mondial fondé sur des règles et a grandement profité des avantages découlant de ce système. Il s'agissait de principes et de normes qui étaient appliqués la plupart du temps pour la très grande majorité des États démocratiques, bien que dans quelques cas, certains pays ne les ont pas appliqués parfaitement. Le système reposait sur des principes fondamentaux comme l'intégrité territoriale, les droits de la personne, la démocratie, le respect de la primauté du droit, et l'aspiration que les relations commerciales soient libres et amicales. La volonté commune de maintenir cet ordre mondial découlait de la détermination ardente de ne pas répéter les erreurs du passé immédiat. L'humanité a appris de par son expérience directe de l'horreur et des bouleversements que de chercher uniquement à satisfaire les intérêts nationaux et de suivre la loi de la jungle ne menait à rien d'autre qu'au carnage et à la pauvreté de tous. Deux conflits d'importance mondiale, de même que la grande crise qui se sont produits dans moins d'un demi-siècle, ont appris à nos parents et à nos grands-parents que les frontières nationales doivent rester intactes, que les relations internationales commerciales engendrent non seulement de la prospérité, mais aussi de la paix, et qu'une vraie communauté mondiale fondée sur des normes et des aspirations communes n'est pas que souhaitable, mais aussi indispensable pour notre survie humaine. Ce profond désir d'établir une paix durable a entraîné la création des institutions internationales qui existent encore et au cœur desquelles se trouvent les pays de l'Europe de l'Ouest, de même que leurs alliés transatlantiques, les États-Unis et le Canada. In each of these evolutions in how we humans organize ourselves, Canadians played pivotal roles. There was Bretton Woods itself, where the Canadian delegation was instrumental in drafting provisions of the fledgling International Monetary Fund and the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development. A few years later, in 1947, a Canadian, Dana Wilgress, played a leading role at the meetings in Geneva that led to the development of the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, precursor to the WTO. It is a Canadian, John Humphrey, who is generally credited as the principal author of the Universal Declaration on Human Rights, which was adopted by the UN General Assembly in 1948. That was the first of what became a series of declarations to set international standards in this vital area. And let us not neglect the great Canadian, perhaps best known for advancing the cause of humanitarian intervention, Lester B. Pearson. He was awarded the Nobel Prize for his leadership during the Suez Crisis in 1956 for the creation of modern peacekeeping. These institutions may seem commonplace today. We may take them for granted. We should not. 70 years ago, they were revolutionary, and they set the stage for the longest period of peace and prosperity in our history. It was the same appreciation of the common interests of the human family in caring for our common home that led us to the Acid Rain Treaty of the Mulrooney era. It is what led us to the Montreal Protocol of 1987 to phase out CFCs and preserve the ozone layer. It is what led us ultimately to Paris, with 194 signatories at our side. That is global cooperation. And it is important to note that when sacrifice was required to support and strengthen the global order, military power in defense of our principles and alliances, Canada was there. In Suez, in Korea, in the Congo, in Cyprus, in the First Gulf War, in the Balkans, in Afghanistan, up to and including today in Iraq, among many other places. Canada has been there. As the Prime Minister has often said, that is what Canadians do. We step up. Today, it is worth reminding ourselves why we step up, why we devote time and resources to foreign policy and defense and development, why we have sent Canadian soldiers, sailors, aviators, diplomats, aid workers, intelligence officers, doctors, nurses, medics, and engineers into situations of danger, disaster, and chaos overseas, even at times when Canadian territory was not directly at risk. Why do we spend billions on defense if we are not immediately threatened? For some countries, Israel, Latvia come to mind, the answer is self-evident. Countries that face a clear and immediate existential challenge know they need to spend on military and foreign policy, and they know why. For a few lucky countries, like Canada and the United States, that feel protected by geography and good neighbors, the answer is less obvious. Indeed, you could easily imagine a Canadian view that says, we are safe on our continent, and we have things to do at home. So let's turn inward. Let's say Canada first. Here's why that would be wrong. D'abord, même si aucun adversaire étranger ne s'apprête à nous envahir, nous sommes tout de même confrontés à des défis clairs. Le changement climatique est une menace commune qui touche chaque personne sur cette planète. Les guerres civiles, la pauvreté, la sécheresse et les catastrophes naturelles qui s'y produisent partout dans le monde constituent aussi une menace pour nous, et pas seulement parce que ces catastrophes causent des migrations de masse déstabilisatrices à l'échelle mondiale. À titre d'exemple, la dictature en Corée du Nord, les crimes contre l'humanité en Syrie, les extrémistes monstrueux de Daesh, ainsi que l'aventurisme militaire et l'expansionnisme de la Russie présentent des menaces stratégiques claires pour le monde libéral démocratique, y compris le Canada. Notre capacité de lutter seule contre ces menaces est limitée. Cette lutte nécessite la coopération des pays au goût similaire. On the military front, Canada's geography has meant that we have always been able to count on American self-interest to provide a protective umbrella beneath which we have found indirect shelter. Some think, some even say, we should therefore free ride on U.S. military power. Why invest billions to maintain a capable, professional, well-funded, and well-equipped Canadian military? The answer is obvious. To rely solely on the U.S. security umbrella would make us a client state. And although we have an incredibly good relationship with our American friends and neighbors, such a dependence would not be in Canada's interest. That is why doing our fair share is clearly necessary. It is why our commitment to NORAD and to our strategic relationship with the United States is so critical. It is by pulling our weight in this partnership and in all our international partnerships that we, in fact, have weight. To put it plainly, Canadian diplomacy and development sometimes require the backing of hard power. Force is, of course, always a last resort, but the principled use of force, together with our allies and governed by international law, is a part of our history, and it must be a part of our future. To have that capacity requires substantial investment, which this government is committed to making. The Minister of Defence will elaborate fully on that tomorrow. I know he will make Canadians justly proud. Whatever their politics, Canadians understand that as a middle power living next to the world's only superpower, Canada has a huge interest in an international order based on rules, one in which might is not always right, one in which more powerful countries are constrained in their treatment of smaller ones by standards that are internationally respected, enforced, and upheld. The single most important pillar of this, which emerged following the carnage of the First and Second World Wars, is the sanctity of borders. And that principle today is under siege. That is why the democratic world has united behind Ukraine. The illegal seizure of Ukrainian territory by Russia is the first time since the end of the Second World War that a European power has annexed by force the territory of another European country. This is not something we can accept or ignore. The atrocities of Daesh directly challenge both the sanctity of borders and the liberal international order itself. They create chaos, not only because of the carnage they perpetrate on their innocent victims, but because of the humanitarian crises and migratory explosions that follow. This is why the world has united against this scourge. Violent extremism challenges our very way of life. We will always oppose it. Another key benefit for Canada from an international system based on rules is, of course, free trade. In this sphere as well, beggar thy neighbor policies hit middle powers soonest and hardest. That is the implacable lesson of the 1930s and the Great Depression. Rising trade barriers hurt the people they are intended to help. They curb growth, stifle innovation, and kill employment. This is a lesson we should learn from history. We should not need to teach it to ourselves again through painful experience. L'autre mondial dans lequel nous avons grandi est confronté à deux grands défis sans précédent. Le premier défi est l'émergence rapide de l'ensemble du Sud et de l'Asie, plus particulièrement de la Chine.
Particularly China, and the need to integrate these countries into the world's economic and political system in a way that is additive, that preserves the best of the old order that preceded their rise, and that addresses the existential threat of climate change. This is a problem that simply cannot be solved by nations working alone. We must work together.
Je me suis concentrée jusqu'à présent sur le développement
so far
de l'ordre
on the
international
development of the post-war international order,
un processus
a
mené
process that was led
principalement par les
primarily
puissances
by
de
the Atlantic powers of
l'Amérique
North
du Nord
America
et l'Europe
and
de l'Ouest.
Western Europe.
Mais nous reconnaissons que
But we
l'équilibre
recognize
global
that the
du
global
pouvoir
balance
a
of power has
considérablement
changed
changé
greatly
depuis
since
cette
then,
époque et continuera à
and it will
évoluer au
continue to
fur
evolve
et à mesure
as more
que de
nations
nouvelles
prosper.
nations prospèrent. The G20, in whose creation Canada was instrumental, was an early acknowledgement of this emerging reality. The countries of Latin America and the Caribbean, Africa, and Asia are on the ascendant, delivering ever-increasing living standards to fast-growing populations, bursting with innovation, creativity, and enterprise. This is not a trend any of us should fear. It is one we should embrace. Let us recognize that the peace and prosperity we in the West have enjoyed these past 70 years are desired by all and increasingly within reach of all. And as Canadians, let us be agents of that change.
Bravo.
Let us seize the great opportunity we have now to help the people of the world's fastest growing countries join the global middle class and the multilateral system that supports it. Peace and prosperity are every person's birthright. The second great challenge is an exhaustion in the West of the belief among working people, the middle class, that the global system can help them better their lives. This is an enormous crisis of confidence. It has the potential, if we let it, to undermine global prosperity itself. At the root of this anxiety around the world is a pervasive sense that too many people have been left behind, betrayed by a system they were promised would make them better off, but hasn't. Here's the key. It's true that the system is flawed, but international trade is the wrong target. The real culprit is domestic policy that fails to appreciate that continued growth and political stability depend on domestic measures that share the wealth. Admittedly, this is a complicated problem. If there were easy solutions, everybody would be applying them. But let's be clear on this point. It is wrong to view the woes of our middle class as the result of fiendish behavior by foreigners. The truth is that the nature of work has changed because of profound and generally benign global economic innovation. This transformation, driven primarily by automation and the digital revolution, is broadly positive.
Managed fairly, it has the potential to increase prosperity for all, not just the global 1%. That means supporting families, supporting pensioners, and supporting education and retraining, as the Minister of Finance did in his recent budget. By better supporting the middle class and those working hard to join it, Canada is defining an approach to globalization that can be a model. At the same time, we strongly support the Global 2030 goals for sustainable development. The world abroad and the world at home are not two solitudes. They are connected. Likewise, by embracing multiculturalism and diversity, Canadians are embodying a way of life that works. We can say this in all humility, but also without any false self-effacement. Canadians know about living side by side with people of diverse origins and beliefs, whose ancestors hail from the far corners of the globe, in harmony and peace.
We say this in the full knowledge that we also have problems of our own to overcome. Most egregiously, the injustices suffered by Indigenous people in Canada. We must never flinch from acknowledging this great failure, even as we do the hard work of seeking restoration and reconciliation. Now, it is clearly not our role to impose our values around the world, Mr. Speaker. No one appointed us the world's policemen. But it is our role to stand firmly for these rights, both in Canada and abroad. It is our role to provide refuge to the persecuted and downtrodden to the extent we are able, as we are so proud to have done for more than 40,000 Syrian refugees. It is our role to set a standard for how states should treat women, gays and lesbians, transgendered people, racial, ethnic, cultural, linguistic, and religious minorities, and of course, Indigenous people. We can and must play an active role in the preservation and strengthening of the global order from which we have benefited so greatly. Doing so is in our interest because our own open society is most secure in a world of open societies. And it is under threat in a world where open societies are under threat. In short, Canadian liberalism is a precious idea. It would not survive long in a world dominated by the clash of great powers and their vassals, struggling for supremacy, or at best an uneasy détente. Canada can work for better, Mr. Speaker. We must work for better. Je fais maintenant une pause pour m'adresser directement aux États-Unis. Comme le Premier ministre l'a indiqué la semaine dernière, le Canada est extrêmement déçu de la décision du gouvernement fédéral des États-Unis de se retirer de l'accord de Paris sur les changements climatiques. Cela dit, nous continuerons de chercher des occasions, où qu'elles soient, de réaliser des progrès constructifs en matière d'environnement, en collaboration avec nos homologues de Washington et de partout ailleurs des États-Unis, à tous les ordres de gouvernement et avec les partenaires d'affaires, du milieu du travail et de la société civile. Comme je l'ai déjà mentionné, nous, les Canadiens, pouvons être fiers du rôle que nous avons joué dans l'établissement de l'ordre d'après-guerre, ainsi que de la paix et de la prospérité sans précédent qui ont suivi. Yet, even as we celebrate our own part in that project, it is only fair for us to acknowledge the larger contribution of the United States. For in blood, in treasure, in strategic vision, in leadership, America has paid the lion's share. The United States has truly been the indispensable nation, Mr. Speaker, for their unique 7 decades-long contribution to our shared peace and prosperity. And on behalf of all Canadians, I would like to profoundly thank our American friends. As I have argued, Canada believes strongly that this stable, predictable international order has been deeply in our national interest. And we believe it has helped foster peace and prosperity for our southern neighbors too. Yet it would be naive or hypocritical to claim before this House that all Americans today agree. Indeed, many of the voters in last year's presidential election cast their ballots, animated in part by a desire to shrug off the burden of world leadership. To say this is not controversial. It is simply a fact. Canada is grateful and will always be grateful to our neighbor for the outsized role it has played in the world. And we seek and shall continue to seek to persuade our friends that their continued international leadership is very much in their national interest, as well as that of the rest of the free world. Yet, we also recognize that this is ultimately not our decision to make. It is a choice Americans must make for themselves. The fact that our friend and ally has come to question the very worth of its mantle of global leadership puts into sharper focus the need for the rest of us to set our own clear and sovereign course. For Canada, that course must be the renewal, indeed the strengthening, of the post-war multilateral order. We will follow this path with open hands and open hearts extended to our American friends, seeking to make common cause as we have so often in the past, And indeed, as we continue to do now on many fronts, from border security to the defense of North America through NORAD, to the fight against Daesh, to our efforts within NATO, to nurturing and improving our trading relationship, which is the strongest in the world. At the same time, we will work with other like-minded people and countries who share our aims. Mr. Speaker, to put this into sharper focus, those aims are as follows. First, we will robustly support the rules-based international order and all its institutions and seek ways to strengthen and improve them. We will strongly support the multilateral forums where such discussions are held, including the G7, the G20, the OAS, APEC, the WTO, the Commonwealth and La Francophonie, the Arctic Council, and of course, NATO and the UN. A cornerstone of our multilateral agenda is our steadfast commitment to the transatlantic alliance. Our bond is manifest in CETA, our historic trade agreement with the European Union, which we believe in and warmly support, and in our military deployment to Latvia. There can be no clearer sign that NATO and Article 5 are at the heart of Canada's national security policy. We will strive for leadership in all these multilateral forums. We are honored to be hosting the G7 next year, and we are energetically pursuing a 2-year term on the UN Security Council. We seek this UN seat because we wish to be heard, and we are safer and more prosperous, Mr. Speaker, when more of the world shares Canadian values. Ces valeurs comprennent le féminisme, ainsi que la promotion des droits des femmes et des filles. Le fait que notre Premier ministre et notre gouvernement soient fiers de se proclamer féministes est une avancée importante et historique. Les droits des femmes sont des droits de la personne. Ils incluent les droits sexuels et ceux liés à la santé reproductive. And that, Mr. Speaker, includes the right to safe and accessible abortions. Ces droits sont au cœur de notre politique étrangère. À cette fin, ma collègue, le ministre du Développement international et de la francophonie, dévoilera au cours des prochains jours la première politique féministe d'aide internationale du Canada, qui mettra l'accent sur les droits des femmes et des filles, ainsi que l'égalité entre les sexes. Nous placerons le Canada à l'avant-plan des efforts internationaux dans ce domaine. C'est une question de justice de base, mais également d'économie de base. Nous savons qu'en favorisant le renforcement socio-économique des femmes, autant ici qu'à l'étranger, les familles et les pays deviennent plus prospères. Les valeurs canadiennes sont fondées sur la dualité linguistique de notre pays, où coexistent historiquement le français et l'anglais, sur notre fédéralisme coopératif, sur notre citoyenneté multiculturelle, multiethnique et multilingue, ainsi que sur la position géographique de notre pays, qui fait le pont entre l'Atlantique, le Pacifique et l'Arctique. Nos valeurs sont guidées par les traditions et les aspirations des peuples autochtones au Canada. Et nos valeurs comprennent un engagement indéfectible envers le pluralisme, les droits de la personne et la règle du droit. Second, we will make the necessary investments in our military, not only to redress years of neglect and underfunding, but also to place the Canadian Armed Forces on a new footing, with the equipment, training, resources, and consistent, predictable financing they need to do their difficult, dangerous, and important work. We owe this to our women and men in uniform. We will not let them down, Mr. Speaker. Canada's broader interest in investing in a capable, professional, and robust military is very clear. If middle powers do not implicate themselves in the furtherance of peace and stability around the world, that will be left to the great powers to settle among themselves. This would not be in Canada's interest. Third, we are a trading nation. Far from seeing trade as a zero-sum game, we believe in trading relationships that benefit all parties. We look forward to working with our continental partners to modernize the North American Free Trade Agreement and to making a great partnership even better. Nous allons intensifier nos efforts pour diversifier le commerce canadien dans le monde. Nous cherchons activement à conclure de nouveaux accords commerciaux qui seront favorables aux intérêts économiques du Canada et qui reflètent nos valeurs, en prenant comme modèle l'accord commercial entre le Canada et l'Union européenne. Comme je l'ai dit, nous sommes fiers du rôle que le Canada a joué dans la création d'un ordre commercial international fondé sur des règles. Nous croyons en l'OMC et nous poursuivrons notre travail en vue de le renforcer et de nous assurer qu'il réponde mieux aux besoins des gens ordinaires au Canada et ailleurs dans le monde. Nous croyons en un commerce progressif qui est au service des travailleurs. C'est pourquoi nous sommes très fiers du fait que le Canada ratifiera ce mois-ci la dernière des conventions fondamentales de l'Organisation internationale du travail. En résumé, nous travaillerons sans relâche à la promotion d'une ordre international, à la défense de nos valeurs canadiennes progressives et à la création d'un ordre international fondé sur des règles pour le XXIe siècle. Il y a de cela 70 ans, le Canada a joué un rôle de premier plan dans la mise en place d'un ordre mondial d'après-guerre. Et maintenant, notre expérience, expertise, géographie et diversité, ainsi que nos valeurs, font en sorte que nous sommes appelés à répéter cet exploit. Mr. Speaker, these are ambitious objectives. There is no guarantee of success. We set them not in the assumption success will come easily, but in the certain knowledge it will not. We will venture in noble and good causes. We will risk. We will enjoy victories, and we will suffer defeats. But we will keep working towards a better world, Mr. Speaker, because that is what Canadians do. Let me conclude on a personal note. A popular criticism today of the arguments I am making here is that all such ideas are abstract, perhaps of interest to the so-called Laurentian elite, or the media, or the Ottawa bubble, but not at all relevant to real Canadians. That line of reasoning is the ultimate elite condescension. It is nonsense. And in reply, I offer the example of my grandfather, John Wilbur Freeland. He was born in Peace River, Alberta, the son of a pioneer family. Wilbur was 24 in 1940 and making a bit of a living as a cowboy and boxer. His nickname was Pretty Boy Freeland. My grandpa was the opposite of an Upper Canada elite. But in the darkest days of the Second World War, Wilbur enlisted to serve. Two brothers, Carleton and Warren, joined up too. Wilbur and Carleton came home. Warren did not. My grandfather told me they signed up partly for the excitement. Europe, even at war, was an exotic destination for the young men of the peace country. Mais il faut voir dans ce geste plus que la soif d'aventure d'un jeune homme. Mon grand-père faisait partie d'une génération de Canadiens qui comprenaient intuitivement le lien entre leur vie et celle des personnes qu'ils n'avaient jamais rencontrées, dont ils ne comprenaient pas la langue et qui habitaient sur un continent si loin que cela consistait à l'époque un autre monde. That generation of Canadians, the greatest generation, we call them, with good reason, had survived the Great Depression. They were born in the aftermath of the First World War. They appreciated viscerally that a world without fixed borders or rules for the global economy was a world of strife and poverty. They sought to prevent that from ever happening again. C'est pourquoi ils ont risqué et donné leur vie pour se battre dans la guerre en Europe. C'est pourquoi, lorsqu'ils sont revenus à la maison, ils ont contribué avec enthousiasme au grand projet de rebâtir l'Europe et de créer un ordre mondial d'après-guerre. Et c'est pourquoi ils s'estimaient heureux de pouvoir participer à cet effort. They were our parents, our grandparents, and our great-grandparents. The challenge we face today is significant, to be sure, but it pales next to the task they faced and met. Our job today is to preserve their achievement and to build on it, to use the multilateral structures they created as the foundation for global accords and institutions fit for the new realities of our century. They rose to their generation's great challenge, Mr. Speaker. So can we. Thank you.